Hi, I'm Hayden of One Love Voice. Thank you for joining us for our fall semester Bible study as we dive into the first 8 chapters of the book of Romans. In today's study, Paul talks about the inner struggle we all feel between wanting to do what's right and still giving in to sin. He explains that the law shows us what's wrong, but it can't save us or change our hearts. Paul compares it to being set free from an old life so that we can now belong to Jesus. Even though we still mess up, we don't have to stay stuck. Jesus gives us the power to live in freedom, not by obeying laws, but in a new way of living in the Spirit. Let's begin with the first part of our reading for today's study, Romans chapter 7, verses 1 through 13.
All right, fantastic. Okay, starting in verse 1. Now, dear brothers and sisters, you who are familiar with the law, don't you know that the law applies only while a person is living? For example, when a woman marries, the law binds her to her husband as long as she is alive. But if he dies, the law of marriage no longer applies to her. So while her husband is alive, she would be committing adultery if she married another man. But if her husband dies, she is free from that law and does not commit adultery when she remarries. So, my dear brothers and sisters, this is the point. You died to the power of the law when you died with Christ, and now you are united with the one who raised from the dead. As a result, we can produce a harvest of good deeds for God. When we were controlled by our old nature, sinful desires were at work within us, and the law aroused these evil desires that produced a harvest of sinful deeds, resulting in death. But now we have been released from the law, for we died to it and are no longer captive to its power. Now we can serve God, not in the old way of obeying the letter of the law, but in the new way of living in the Spirit. Well then, am I suggesting that the law of God is sinful? Of course not. In fact, it was the law that showed me my sin. I would never have known that coveting is wrong if the law had not said, you must not covet. But sin used this command to arouse all kinds of covetous desires within me. If there were no law, sin would not have that power. At one time, I lived without understanding the law. But when I learned the command not to covet, for instance, the power of sin came to life, and I died. So I discovered that the law's commands, which were supposed to bring life, brought spiritual death instead. Sin took advantage of those commands and deceived me. It used the commands to kill me. But still, the law itself is holy, and its commands are holy and right and good. But how can that be? Did the law, which is good, cause my death? Of course not. Sin used what was good to bring about my condemnation to death. So we can see how terrible sin really is. It uses God's good commands for its own evil purpose.
Let's take a moment to break down what Paul is saying in the first 13 verses of chapter 7. Paul opens the chapter with an example of marriage, pointing out that when your spouse dies, the laws of that marriage no longer exist. That's the point, he says. We died with Christ, so the law of sin no longer control us. Sin used to control us, but now we are free to live for God. Paul explains that God's law itself was not sinful, but the sin within him came to life when he understood God's law, and it deceived and killed him. Sin used God's good commands for its own evil purposes.
Before we get started with our first conversation, take a few minutes and jot down your answers to the opening question. Don't stress if it's not very detailed, or even if you don't know. That's okay. This course is all about helping you grow and build a solid understanding as we go. Now that you've had a chance to write your answer, let's dive into our first discussion on Romans chapter 7, verses 1 through 13, about sin's evil purposes.
The verse that really stands out to me is here in verse 6, where Paul says, but now we have been released from the law, or now we've been released from these rules and regulations, these things that want to draw us into sin, right?
Mm-hmm.
It says, for we died to it and we're no longer captive to its power. This goes back to what we just talked about in the last chapter, right?
Right.
And then he says, now we can serve God not in the old way of obeying the letter of the law, but in the new way of living in the Spirit.
Yeah.
Paul's going to really
Yeah.
dive into this in chapter 8, but he's pointing us to this picture of we're not following God out of a rules-based, like, regulation relationship of do this, don't do that. He's saying, but it's this law of the Spirit. It's this living by the Spirit, which really points to a relationship. It's like God has placed that Spirit inside of us now, given us this freedom over sin. And when we lean into that, when we lean into wanting to please God and live by the Spirit of God, it's based out of this love relationship that we now have with Him, not do this, don't do that.
Okay, so I'm looking back through this as you're talking, and I'm sure everybody has felt this way somewhere in their life, especially if you grew up in a Christian home and you grew up in the church, where basic fundamentals of Christianity are taught, and it feels very much like what you just said. Do this, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see a lot of people go, and I mean, I remember I had friends that were like, I mean, I believe in God and I want to serve God, but I want to live my life first.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to go have some fun first. Because the
Yeah.
idea of Christianity and fun didn't go together, because it was presented in a way of so much rules and regulations, right?
Yeah.
And so the idea of that so many of us have, that God is going, do this, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Follow this. Da, da, da. It feels
Yeah.
very controlling. When the reality is, when you get into the Word and you get to see the nature of God, it's the opposite of control.
Mm-hmm.
The most controlling thing in the world is the very thing that we think is freedom.
And that's sin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's. I think. I don't know how to say this
No,
without with it sounding abrasive, but because I'm an abrasive person. Just kidding. What we call control is the opposite. Because when God tells us, don't do this. It's not a, because I said so, I want to control you. It's a, this is going to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to hurt you so bad. And like I always joke, but I attribute it to kids camp. When kids have freedom for the first time in their life from their parents with spending money. Like I'm telling you, it's weird. It's the weirdest thing, because these kids have never had $50, $100, $20 and just been able to run free. And parents send their kids to camp, and trust me, it's wonderful. You should send your kids to camp. It's great. But they send their kids to camp trusting these college adults to, yes, they're going to keep your kids safe. Yes, they're going to make sure your kid has a great time. Yes, they're going to make sure your kid encounters God. But guess what they're not doing? They're not monitoring their free spending money. They're not.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
This is like 26 years of being involved in kids and youth ministry. There's never been a summer camp where I've not had a kid throw up. And those moments always stand out to me as, this is why mom and dad say you can have one cookie.
Mm-hmm.
You can have one bag of chips. You can have one brownie. You can have one scoop of ice cream.
Right.
Not
Right.
you can have the gallon and tell me how it works out for you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think that when we look at that, like with kids, and you're just like, well, of course, that's why you say no. Then we look at God and we're like, why is he trying to control me? Same thing. It's not a, hey, I love saying no. I love being in control. I like being the fun sucker of your life.
Yeah.
It's, hey, I know that this could be detrimental.
Yeah.
Let's continue by reading the second half of chapter 7, verses 14 through 25.
So the trouble is not with the law, for it is spiritual and good. The trouble is with me, for I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I'm doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I'm not the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. For I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I'm not really the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. I've discovered this principle of life, that when I want to do what is right, I inevitably do what is wrong. I love God's law with all my heart. But there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to the sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God. The answer is Jesus Christ our Lord. So you see how it is. In my mind, I really want to obey God's law, but because my sinful nature, I am a slave to sin.
Let's take a moment again to break down what Paul is saying in the second half of chapter 7. Paul describes the inner battle every believer faces, the struggle between our sinful nature and the desire to do what's right. He says that sin is something that controls us against our own desires. Then Paul explains that the problem isn't the law or rules, it's sin living within us that pull us away from what's right. He uses himself to show the frustration of wanting to please God, but feeling weak to do it on his own. So Paul cries out, "Who will rescue me from this life dominated by sin and death?" But he ends with hope. Our rescue comes through Jesus Christ, who gives us the power to overcome what we never could on our own.
Now let's move on to our second discussion, the power to overcome.
So it almost sounds like Paul is contradicting himself
For sure.
in these verses, because he's spent this whole time telling us that we're free from sin, that we have this new nature to serve God that is free from the chains of slavery to sin. And then he shows up with these verses and says, but every time I try to do good, I don't. I'm all too human. And I think the thing that we have to realize is Paul's using this to show us the difference between the sinful nature and what we've been set free from, to show us that as we lean into living by the Spirit, as we lean into following after the Lord, that's when we'll find this freedom. But he's pointing back to that sinful nature in these verses to say, if I want to follow after that, this is going to be the result of it.
Sure.
This is what's going to happen, because every time I try to do good, I'm going to end up not doing it.
Right.
Every time I want to do the right thing, I'm going to end up doing the wrong thing.
Well, I mean, really, it's just a partnership. Anytime we try to do it on our own without saying, God, I need your help.
Yeah.
How many times have you decided, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get up every morning and I'm going to pray. I'm going to fast.
Yeah.
I'm going to read my Bible. I'm going to do this. And you, on your own, want to do it. And then that sin nature, that flesh rises up. How many times have you said you were going to do something and then you failed? Number one, it's because the enemy doesn't want you to complete that. The enemy doesn't want you to do those things.
Yeah.
And number two, that sin nature rises up so strong. It takes everything. That's why the Bible says you kill your flesh. Like, it's like that it's hard. But the people who, when God puts it on your heart to do something, when you follow, it is the hardest thing in the world. And it's not the start, it's the finish, right? Starting things, it's the finish. But when you do it and you crucify your flesh, you'll have breakthrough. Mark my word. If the Lord puts it on your heart to wake up early every morning, 30 minutes every morning, and spend time with him, and you consistently do it, you don't make excuses, you'll have breakthrough. If God's put it on your heart to fast for a day, fast for a week, and whatever, if whatever it is the Lord's put on your heart, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, and you're going to make excuses. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
But when you follow through and you're like, it didn't matter if my stomach falls out right now, I'm not going to eat because God, I'm doing this for the Lord.
Yeah.
You make it through, you're going to have breakthrough. Like that's the way it works.
Yeah.
When God's asking you, hey, I want you to give up social media. I want you to give up this. It's that you can say, well, how is that sinful? If the Lord, if you're trying to work through something, and part of that is just your flesh, what he's talking about here.
Sure.
When you surrender that to God, that surrender is painful because we want it.
Yeah.
I don't want to give this up. I don't want to, like, you go on a diet, you all of a sudden crave things you've never craved before. All of a sudden because you know you're not allowed to have it.
Yeah.
Same concept. And so it's dying to self, what Paul talks about, and surrendering to the Lord that allows us to take control from the enemy and walk in freedom.
This is the very thing that Paul wants us to lean into.
Yeah.
That's why he's bringing this back up again. That's why he's talking about the sin nature again, because he's wanting us to see that it's going to require something, actually someone bigger than us to overcome that sin nature. Even though we've been given the freedom over it by the chains have been removed, but as long as we live on this earth, as long as we live in these bodies and that sin nature is present, it's going to take an effort, and it's going to take leaning in and living by the Spirit of God
daily
if we're going to live successfully over that.
Yes, daily. I think we think, oh, I did that yesterday. It's a new day. Daily.
Let's take a minute to recap what we've learned. In today's study, Paul showed us that knowing what's right isn't enough. We need Jesus to truly change us from the inside out. He explained that the law helps us see our sin, but it can't save us. Even when we want to do good, we still fight against our sinful nature. Paul acknowledges that the struggle is real, but he also told us that there's hope. Jesus gives us freedom and strength to overcome what we can't handle on our own. Now it's time to consider how we'll each respond to Paul's words. You'll find some suggested responses on your worksheet, but don't feel limited. Use the space provided to write your own response if something else is on your heart. Thank you for joining us in our study of Romans. We hope the time we shared was both encouraging and insightful. We'd love for you to join us again next week as we continue exploring Paul's powerful message of the good news together.